Friday evenings had a rhythm of their own in our household, a rhythm that had become almost hypnotic over the years. That particular evening, however, felt subtly different. My husband, Michael, who usually preferred a quiet night in with me, announced he was heading to a reunion with his college friends. His voice carried an easy, casual tone, but I couldn't help but notice the extra effort he was putting into his appearance. The navy blue blazer he chose was freshly pressed, and his cologne, a heady, woodsy scent I hadn't smelled on him in months, hung in the air like a declaration. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he caught my eye and smiled, a charming grin that had once melted my heart. But tonight, that grin felt rehearsed, practiced. I dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it arose. After all, Michael had never given me a reason to doubt him in the 12 years we'd been married. When he leaned in to kiss me goodbye, I felt the usual warmth in his touch, the same warmth that had reassured me countless times over the years. "Don't wait up for me," he said with a wink. "It might be a late one." I watched him leave, his figure silhouetted against the amber glow of the streetlights. As the door clicked shut, a faint unease settled in the pit of my stomach. I shook it off, convincing myself it was nothing more than the weariness of a long week. But deep down, something felt off. The evening unfolded with a quiet monotony. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, hoping the warmth would soothe the unease gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. With the television murmuring in the background, I tried to immerse myself in a romantic drama. The characters' passionate exchanges should have been enough to distract me, but my mind kept drifting back to Michael. Usually, he was good about keeping in touch, a quick text, a photo of his friends laughing over drinks, or even a check-in on social media. But tonight, my phone remained silent. No notifications, no updates, just the glowing screen mocking my growing anxiety. I tried to rationalize his silence. Perhaps he was caught up in the excitement of seeing old friends, too busy reminiscing to bother with his phone. Still, as the hours slipped by, the unease grew heavier. By midnight, I was pacing the living room, my bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood floor. The sound of the clock ticking echoed in the stillness, each second stretching longer than the last. I clutched my phone tightly, staring at the empty notifications bar, willing it to light up with a message from him. By 1 a.m., the silence had become unbearable. I found myself scrolling through Michael's social media, searching for any sign of his evening. My heart sank when I realized his last post was from days ago, a picture of us together at Central Park. There was no evidence of tonight's reunion, no smiling faces of old friends, no candid snapshots of shared laughter. A gnawing doubt began to take root in my mind. I told myself I was overreacting, letting my imagination run wild. But no matter how hard I tried to push the thoughts away, they kept circling back. Michael had never been the type to vanish without a trace. His sudden silence felt like a glaring anomaly, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. As the clock struck 2 a.m., I gave up pretending to watch the movie. The credits rolled across the screen, but I couldn't recall a single scene. My mind was too preoccupied with the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed a blanket and curled up on the couch, my fingers nervously tapping against the edge of my phone. By the time 2:30 a.m. rolled around, I had convinced myself there was only one way to ease my spiraling thoughts. For years, Michael and I had shared a phone plan, a convenience born out of trust and practicality. I had never felt the need to check his call logs or message history before. Tonight, however, was different. My heart pounded as I opened the account on my phone. The decision felt invasive, like crossing a sacred boundary. But the alternative, sitting in the dark with my doubts, felt worse. As the data loaded, I tried to steady my breathing, convincing myself this was all a misunderstanding. The list of recent calls and messages appeared, and my eyes scanned the names quickly. Most were familiar, colleagues, mutual friends, his parents. But one name stood out, glaringly unfamiliar, Sophia. Her name appeared more times than I could count, each instance like a spark igniting the flames of suspicion. Sophia. The name echoed in my mind, heavy with implications. I stared at the screen, trying to rationalize her frequent presence in Michael's call logs. Perhaps she was a work colleague, someone he needed to contact often for professional reasons. Yet deep down, I knew this explanation was too convenient. Her name wasn't just present, it dominated the list, appearing at odd hours that didn't align with office schedules. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the button to access their messages. Crossing this line felt wrong, but my growing unease overpowered my guilt. Taking a deep breath, I tapped on her name. The message history unfolded like a trail of breadcrumbs, leading me into a world I hadn't known existed. At first, the texts seemed harmless, short exchanges about meetings and projects. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. Messages became more personal, peppered with inside jokes and playful banter. Then, a message sent earlier that evening caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you tonight. It's been too long." My chest tightened. The words were simple but carried a weight that left no room for misinterpretation. My fingers trembled as I continued reading, each message like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. The hours ticked by, but sleep remained elusive. I lay awake in bed, my thoughts racing. Michael had always been my rock, the steady presence I could count on through life's ups and downs. Yet here I was, questioning everything I thought I knew about the man I had built my life with. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness. Michael slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. I watched him, searching his face for answers. How could someone who seemed so genuine, so devoted, harbor such a secret? My heart ached with betrayal, but I knew confronting him without concrete proof would only lead to denial and excuses. Over breakfast, I observed him closely. He was his usual charming self, cracking jokes and recounting a story from work. But I couldn't help noticing the small details, the way he avoided meeting my eyes for too long, the subtle hesitation in his responses. My instincts screamed that he was hiding something, and I resolved to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The days that followed turned me into a detective, piecing together fragments of information to form a clearer picture. I combed through Michael's social media, searching for any mention of Sophia. It didn't take long to find her. Her profile was public, filled with carefully curated photos that showcased her vibrant personality. She was beautiful, confident, and utterly captivating, the kind of woman who could easily turn heads. Scrolling through her posts, I began to notice subtle connections, pictures of her at events Michael had mentioned attending, comments exchanged between them that hinted at an inside understanding. Each discovery added another layer to the growing narrative, one that painted a picture of betrayal far more intricate than I had anticipated. Determined to leave no stone unturned, I started checking his email. It wasn't difficult, we shared passwords for everything. At first, I found nothing suspicious, just the usual work-related correspondence. But buried in his archive folder was a string of emails with Sophia, their tone unmistakably intimate. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to dig deeper, uncovering more evidence of Michael's secret life. The messages between him and Sophia grew increasingly personal, revealing a relationship that had blossomed over months, if not years. The betrayal felt like a slow, agonizing wound, each new discovery cutting deeper than the last. Yet, despite the pain, I couldn't bring myself to confront him, not yet. I needed more than just text messages and social media interactions. I needed undeniable proof, something that would leave no room for manipulation or excuses. I began tracking his movements, noting the times he claimed to be at work or running errands. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. On several occasions, his location didn't align with his explanations. One particularly damning instance was when he claimed to be working late, only for me to discover he had been at the Maple Leaf Cafe, Sophia's favorite spot, according to her social media. Determined to gather irrefutable evidence, I took a step I never thought I'd take. I purchased a set of discreet cameras and installed them in our home. It was an invasion of privacy, a line I never imagined crossing. But the stakes were too high. I needed to know the truth, and if Michael was bringing his deception into our home, I wanted it captured on camera. The first few days yielded nothing unusual. Michael went about his routine as if nothing was amiss, his behavior calm and collected. But on the fourth day, I caught him on a call with Sophia. His tone was casual, but the words he spoke revealed a familiarity that was impossible to ignore. He laughed at her jokes, complimented her in ways that stung, and ended the call with a promise to see her soon. Each interaction recorded on the cameras became another piece of the puzzle, adding to the growing mountain of evidence I compiled. It all meticulously, knowing that the confrontation would come soon. But I wanted to be ready not just for the confrontation, but for the aftermath. When the day finally came, it wasn't a grand revelation or a heated argument that set things in motion. Michael mentioned offhandedly that he was meeting a friend for lunch. My heart raced as I nodded, feigning nonchalance. I knew exactly who he was meeting, and this time, I planned to follow him from a distance. I watched as he greeted Sophia outside the Maple Leaf Cafe. They embraced like old lovers, their familiarity undeniable. My chest tightened as I snapped photos, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. This was the proof I needed, the moment that solidified the truth I had been piecing together for weeks. Returning home after witnessing the embrace between Michael and Sophia, I felt a swirl of emotions: anger, sorrow, and the overwhelming need for closure. But my actions couldn't be impulsive. This wasn't about a fleeting outburst, it was about laying bare the truth in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. I spent the evening organizing my findings. I went over the photos I had taken, each one a painful reminder of Michael's betrayal. I paired them with the screenshots of their messages, emails, and recorded calls. Piece by piece, I compiled the story of his affair, ensuring that every detail was clear, every lie exposed. The cameras had captured enough to complete the picture: Michael's late-night calls, his secretive behavior, even his moments of hesitation when I asked about his whereabouts. The weight of my evidence was undeniable, and I knew it was time to confront him. That night, Michael came home with the same practiced smile he always wore after one of his so-called meetings. He set his keys on the counter and greeted me as though everything were perfectly normal. I felt my chest tighten as I watched him move around the room, his ease a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "Did you have a good day?" he asked, his tone light. I forced a smile, nodding as I replied, "It was fine. How about you? Did you have a productive lunch?" His eyes flickered briefly, a hesitation so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. "Yeah, just catching up with a friend," he said casually, avoiding my gaze. It took everything in me to maintain my composure. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew the time wasn't right. Instead, I nodded and excused myself, retreating to the bedroom where my carefully curated file of evidence waited. The next morning, I began planning the confrontation. My approach had to be calculated, leaving no room for him to twist the narrative or deny the truth. I decided to use a presentation, an undeniable visual compilation of his lies. Using a video editing program, I pieced together the evidence: photos of him with Sophia, their messages displayed alongside timestamps, snippets of recorded calls, and even the footage from the hidden cameras. Each element was arranged in chronological order, telling a story so vivid that no words would be needed to explain it. I debated whether to make the confrontation public or keep it between the two of us. While the idea of exposing him to others was tempting, I realized that I didn't want to stoop to his level. This was about my dignity, not vengeance. As I worked on the presentation, there were moments when doubt crept in. Despite everything, I couldn't forget the man Michael had once been, the kind, supportive partner who had stood by me through life's challenges. Memories of our happiest moments flashed through my mind, making me question whether I could truly go through with this. But then I glanced at the evidence, the messages filled with flirtation and promises, and the pain would return with a vengeance. This wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was a calculated betrayal, and I deserved better. The confrontation was set for Friday evening, a time when Michael and I would usually share a quiet dinner together. I spent the day preparing, replaying the scenarios in my head. Would he deny it? Get angry? Beg for forgiveness? I tried to brace myself for every possibility. When he arrived home, I greeted him as usual, masking the storm brewing within me. We ate dinner in near silence, the tension in the air palpable. Michael seemed distracted, glancing at his phone every few minutes. I couldn't help but wonder if he was texting Sophia, making plans for later. After dinner, I asked him to join me in the living room. "There's something I need to show you," I said, my voice calm but firm. He looked puzzled but followed me, taking a seat on the couch. I set up my laptop on the coffee table, the screen angled so he could see it clearly. "What's this?" he asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. "You'll see," I replied, pressing play. The video began with the messages, the playful texts exchanged between him and Sophia. His expression shifted from confusion to discomfort as he recognized the content. I watched his reaction closely, noting the way his jaw tightened and his hands clenched. Next came the photos, each one more damning than the last. Michael sat frozen, his face pale as the images scrolled across the screen. When the footage from the cameras played, capturing his calls with Sophia, he finally spoke. "This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice unsteady. "What is it, then?" I asked, my tone calm despite the storm raging inside me. He struggled to find the words, his usual charm faltering. It's not what you think. Sophia is just a friend. We've been working on a project together. That's all." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "A project? Is that what you call late-night texts and secret lunch dates? What about the messages where you couldn't wait to see her? Or the pictures of you holding her like she's more than just a friend?" He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, realizing there was no excuse that could absolve him. Michael's silence spoke louder than any words could. "I trusted you," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." The weight of his words crushed me. An apology couldn't undo the damage, couldn't erase the pain of betrayal. "Sorry isn't enough," I said, standing up. "I deserve more than this. I deserve more than you." Michael sat on the couch, his shoulders slumped as though the weight of the world had finally descended upon him. The man I once saw as my partner, my confidant, looked small, almost pitiful. But my heart felt no sympathy. The betrayal was too great, the wound too raw. "I don't think you understand the gravity of what you've done," I said, pacing the room as I tried to contain the fury bubbling within me. "You didn't just cheat. You destroyed everything we built, every memory, every promise, every ounce of trust." Michael's face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I had once loved. But that man was a memory now, a shadow of someone I could no longer trust. "I'll do anything to fix this," he said, his voice breaking. He reached for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us more than just physical. "I love you," he pleaded. "Love?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You don't do this to someone you love. You don't lie, sneak around, and betray them. Whatever you think this is, it's not love." In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't stay with him, not after everything he had done. My self-respect, my dignity demanded that I walk away. The next morning, I began packing my things. The act was strangely therapeutic, each item I placed in the suitcase a step closer to reclaiming my life. Michael hovered nearby, his expression a mix of despair and helplessness. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We can work through this. We can go to counseling, rebuild what we had." I paused, turning to face him. "What we had is gone, Michael. You destroyed it the moment you decided Sophia was worth more than our marriage. There's no coming back from this." His face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I had once loved. But that man was a memory now, a part of my past. Word of Michael's affair spread quickly. It wasn't my doing, I had kept the details private, but the cameras had captured more than I anticipated. And in his desperation to justify his actions, Michael had confided in a mutual friend. That friend, unable to keep quiet, shared the story with others. Soon, whispers turned into full-blown gossip. Michael's carefully constructed image as a devoted husband, an upstanding man, began to crumble. Friends, colleagues, even family members reached out to me, offering their support. Some were shocked, others disappointed, but all of them stood firmly on my side. For Michael, the fallout was devastating. His social circle grew smaller, and his once flourishing career began to suffer. It was as though the universe itself was holding him accountable for his actions. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a small but cozy apartment in Brooklyn, filling it with things that brought me joy: bright curtains, soft rugs, and shelves lined with books I had always wanted to read. Each day was a step forward, a chance to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Michael. I took up painting, something I had given up years ago, and found solace in the strokes of color that brought life to blank canvases. Therapy became a lifeline, a space where I could unpack the pain and begin to heal. My therapist reminded me that betrayal said more about the betrayer than the betrayed, and that lesson became a mantra I carried with me. One evening, weeks after I had moved out, Michael showed up unannounced at my door. His face was haggard, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He held a bouquet of my favorite flowers, their bright petals a stark contrast to his defeated demeanor. "I just want to talk," he said, his voice trembling. I hesitated, my hand tightening on the door frame. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, but another part, a smaller, quieter part, wanted closure. I stepped aside, letting him in. He looked around the apartment, his eyes lingering on the small touches that made the space mine. "You've done well for yourself," he said softly. "Michael, what do you want?" I asked, crossing my arms. He sighed, setting the flowers on the counter. "I want to apologize. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I ruined everything, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." His words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. But they weren't enough. They couldn't erase the pain, the betrayal, or the months of doubt and anguish he had put me through. "I appreciate your apology," I said, my tone steady. "But it doesn't change anything. I've moved on, Michael. You need to do the same." He nodded slowly, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted you to know how sorry I am." For the first time since our confrontation, I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved. But that man was a memory now, a part of my past. I walked him to the door, closing it gently behind him. Life began to take on a new rhythm, one that was mine alone. I started a new job, one that challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated but brought a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. I made new friends, people who supported and uplifted me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free from the weight of betrayal, free from the lies, free to be myself. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself discovering parts of me that had long been buried under the weight of my marriage. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had given away to keep the peace, to maintain the illusion of a perfect relationship. But now, in the quiet of my new life, I was reclaiming those lost fragments. I started saying yes to opportunities that once scared me. I signed up for a solo hiking trip, something I had dreamed of but never pursued. As I stood on the summit of a towering mountain, the wind whipping through my hair, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The view stretched endlessly before me, a reminder of how vast and beautiful the world could be when I allowed myself to explore it. I began to nurture relationships with friends I had unintentionally neglected during my marriage. Their laughter and support became a balm for my wounded heart. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by people who saw me for who I was, not as an extension of Michael or as the wife trying to keep up appearances. Despite the progress I was making, there were moments when the betrayal still haunted me. I would catch myself replaying the night I confronted Michael, the pain in his eyes when he realized the extent of his actions. I wasn't sure if I felt pity or satisfaction, or perhaps a strange mixture of both. Therapy became my sanctuary during those moments. My therapist helped me understand that healing wasn't a straight line. There would be setbacks, days when the hurt felt as raw as it had in the beginning. But each time I confronted those feelings, I came out stronger. I started writing in a journal, pouring my thoughts onto the pages in an effort to make sense of them. Writing became a form of catharsis, a way to process the emotions that still lingered like shadows in the corners of my mind. Over time, those shadows grew fainter, replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt in years. One rainy afternoon, as I wandered through a local bookstore, I bumped into someone who would unexpectedly change the course of my journey. His name was Daniel, a reserved but kind-hearted man with a passion for literature that rivaled my own. We struck up a conversation about a book we both loved, and before I knew it, hours had passed. Daniel's confidence and genuine interest in my thoughts were a stark contrast to the guarded charm Michael had always exuded. At first, I hesitated to open myself up to the possibility of something new. The scars of my past made me cautious, wary of trusting too easily. But Daniel's patience and understanding slowly chipped away at my defenses. He didn't rush me or demand more than I could give. Instead, he simply walked alongside me, offering companionship without expectations. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself thinking about Michael. The anger that had once consumed me had faded, replaced by a quiet sadness for what could have been. Forgiveness had never been about letting him off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the burden of resentment, allowing me to move forward without the weight of his actions holding me back. I didn't call him or write a letter. Forgiveness wasn't something I needed to share with him. It was something I gave to myself. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I realized how far I had come. The pain of betrayal, the uncertainty of starting over, and the struggle to rebuild my life had all led me to this point. Daniel was by my side, his hand resting lightly on mine. We didn't need words to fill the silence. His presence was enough. I had found someone who valued me not for what I could give, but for who I was. My life was no longer defined by the shadows of my past. It was a canvas waiting to be filled with new colors, new experiences, and new memories. As I looked out at the sprawling cityscape, I felt a profound sense of gratitude not for the pain, but for the strength it had given me. The chapter with Michael had ended, but my story was far from over. And this time, I was writing it on my own terms. As the months passed, my life began to take on a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The pain of Michael's betrayal no longer consumed me, though it still lingered in the background like a faint scar. I had learned to live with it, to let it remind me of my strength rather than my vulnerability. Daniel became a steady presence in my life, his quiet support a stark contrast to the chaos I had once known. One evening, as we sat on the couch in my apartment, Daniel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've come so far, you know," he said, his voice soft but filled with admiration. "I don't think you realize how strong you are." I smiled, though his words stirred something deep within me. It didn't feel like strength at the time, I admitted. It felt like survival. "Sometimes," he said, reaching for my hand, "survival is strength." His words stayed with me long after he left that night. I thought about the journey I had been on, the sleepless nights, the tears, the moments of doubt and fear. I had survived it all, and in doing so, I had found a version of myself I didn't know existed. But life, as it often does, had one more twist in store for me. One Saturday morning, as I was sipping coffee and flipping through a magazine, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an unfamiliar sender. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. What I read made my heart stop. The email was from Sophia. Her words were careful, measured, but there was an undercurrent of desperation. She apologized for what she had done, for the role she had played in destroying my marriage. She explained that she hadn't known the full extent of Michael's lies, that he had told her we were separated, that our marriage was over long before she entered the picture. She had believed him, she said, until the truth came out. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she wrote. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to delete the email, to pretend I had never seen it. But another part, a quieter, more curious part, wanted to respond. After a few deep breaths, I typed out a reply. "Thank you for your apology," I wrote. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I appreciate your honesty. I hope you find peace, just as I have." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The act felt cathartic, like closing a door I hadn't realized was still open. A few days later, I received another email, this time from Michael. He had heard about my exchange with Sophia, and it seemed to have stirred something in him. His message was longer, more emotional, filled with regret and self-loathing. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote. "I don't even deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry not just for what I did, but for who I became. You deserved better, and I hope you found it. I read his words over and over, trying to make sense of the emotions they stirred. Anger, sadness, pity, they all swirled together, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. In the end, I decided not to respond. Some wounds, I realized, were better left untouched. Instead, I focused on the life I had built for myself. Daniel and I grew closer, our relationship deepening with each passing day. He was patient and kind, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready. With him, I felt safe not just to love, but to be myself. One evening, as we walked through Prospect Park, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the trees, Daniel stopped and turned to me. I know this might sound crazy, he said, his voice tinged with nervousness, but I can't imagine my life without you. You've changed everything for me. I smiled, my heart swelling with emotion. You've changed everything for me too, I said, squeezing his hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. I'm not asking for an answer now, he said quickly. I just want you to know how I feel. You're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you'll have me. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at him, at the love and sincerity in his gaze. For the first time in a long time, I felt no fear, no hesitation. Just pure, unbridled joy. Yes, I said, my voice steady. Yes, I'll have you. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and as we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The past no longer held me captive. I was free, free to love, free to live, free to be happy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I realized that my story wasn't about Michael or Sophia or even Daniel. It was about me, about the woman I had become, the strength I had found, and the life I had built from the ashes of my past. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next.